So if I'm sitting down on my computer, I've made the decision, having never been to Ontario. I sit down on my computer, I talk to my friends about going to Ontario. What would you say is a reasonable expectation for somebody having never gone to Ontario? What can they expect?
Oh boy, they don't even know what to expect. Ontario is, I mean, we talk about Minnesota, incredible land of 10,000 lakes. There's actually 15,700 lakes in the state of Minnesota. Ontario has 400,000 lakes and rivers. 400,000. And they're not all the same. Let's, for purposes, classify lakes into a couple of different quick classifications. One is a very deep or deeper clear type of a lake. It's a two-story lake. It'll have forage in it like perch and suckers and dace minnows and so forth, insect larvae and all that other kind of stuff. But it'll also have basin fish like ciscos, lake herring, tullibees, whitefish, burbot, sculpin. They're one kind of lake. Some of those will have rivers flowing into them. Some of them won't. They're the lakes, those clearer lakes like that have the two-story forage base and two-story capabilities to the lake, are the ones that'll produce the most amount of trophy fishing. But they can also be harder to fish. That clear water brings on things that dirty water doesn't. Mm-hmm. The second type of a lake we'll look at are the river flows through it lakes, if you will. There's a tremendous amount of those that you can go there and just catch oodles of walleyes. I mean, sometimes you can get 50, 100, 150 walleyes in a day for two guys. But you won't generally get much for real big fish, 5, 6, 7 pounds, maybe even an odd one, 8 or 9 pounds bigger than that. And it somewhat depends upon how big the river system is coming into it as well. But they're usually shallower lakes. They usually don't have lake trout. They a lot of times don't have the basin kind of forage, so you can expect to catch a lot more fish there, but not necessarily as big a size. And I'm talking specifically walleyes. Each kind of fish is different.
Right.
But a lot of guys go up there for walleyes, and pike is the second thing. Though both kinds of lakes can have pike populations as well. It depends on how much pike habitat there is to determine how big a percentage of the fish in that lake are going to be pike. And by pike habitat, I mean you need weeds.
Right.
Walleyes like them too, but the pike have got to spawn in marshy areas. Yeah. That's how they spawn.
Right.
The walleyes spawn on gravel, rock, hard bottom. Their eggs are adhesive. They stick to it, and they need current coming over it, either current caused by wind to oxygenate them or current coming in from a flow of water to oxygenate them. Yeah. So they seek out different kinds of things, and the lakes have got to have it if you're going to have good populations.
What do you think are some of the hardest lessons you've learned fishing in Ontario? What 1 or 2 or 3 hard lessons, something that really sticks out with you that says, yeah, if I'd have known then what I know now?
That's been happening all my life. You learn something and you say, okay, by George, here it is. This is the gospel fact. Mm-hmm. And it might be like a great big pie and you just learned one slice.
Okay.
And you think, boy, that slice is the answer. And then you find out, well, it's maybe not always the answer. Maybe there's got to be something else because it's not happening right now. And then you learn another thing and you see how this one fits in with this one. Oh boy, now you start to get a bigger, better, clearer picture of this pie. And when you get that pie half learned, you realize that there's another half out there somewhere. And now you start digging and find out how these things correlate and how they could, and you just go deeper and deeper, and that's the wonderful part.
Yeah. Every lake there, you might find that half of the pie, or there might be a completely different pie when you go to the next lake.
And then there's other things people have got to understand about fish. They think, okay, because I'm going to Ontario, the fish are going to commit suicide.
Right.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
You don't catch skinny fish with their ribs sticking in and their guts sucked in and so forth, unless it's a real old one going downhill dying.
Yeah.
When fish die, they don't float to the top when they die naturally. The only reason that fish float is that they were killed by something when they had their stomach full. Bacteria action happens on the food in their stomach. It causes them to bloat, and that brings them to the surface. When they die of old age, they die of starvation. They lose their ability to feed. There's nothing in their stomach, and they just roll over in the bottom, and there they stay.
Yeah.
So I got kind of off the track there.
Well, we're just talking about hard lessons learned, but
The hardest lesson learned, I think, is that no matter if you're in Ontario or where you are fishing, understand ahead of time that the lake is going to have way more food in it than the fish need. It has to have. Because you have some years that are good spawn years and other years that are not good spawn years for all different types of fish. And let's say that you had 3 years in a row of incredible spawns for walleyes. You got an 80-90% success ratio, which rarely happens. But let's just say that 3 years in a row, all conditions came right. Now you've got a crop of them coming up through the ranks that there better be enough out here to feed that entire crop if they're going to turn into adults and really go. And then you might have 3 years in a row where you have very low spawning success because conditions didn't get right. You know, and that it all balances itself out in time. But know that ahead of time that there's way more food there. And secondly, people have got to understand somehow food or fish work with food. First off, let's talk about an understanding of food itself. If I'd ask you, Chad, what's the primary source of food in the lake, what would be your answer?
depends on the lake, but perch for walleye, any dace minnows, that basic minnow forage.
And no matter which type of minnow you said, you'd be wrong.
It's bugs.
The primary source of food in any lake, river, ocean, or flooded cow track
Yeah.
is a small plant called phytoplankton. It's produced by heat and energy from the sun with nutrients in the lake, and it floats. It is the phytoplankton that oxygenate our lakes and rivers and everything else. It is the phytoplankton that start the food chain. That's the primary source. The primary consumer of food is a little transparent animal called zooplankton. The only thing they can eat is the phytoplankton. So where the phytoplankton is, the zooplankton have to go to it if they want to eat today. Let's say that a lake is, today the ice goes off of this lake that you're fishing. And it's a typical lake. It's got some shallow bays off to the side, and other sections of the basin of the lake is deep, and so forth. Some medium depth bays, etc. Where's the place that's going to warm fastest?
South side of the lake.
The north side lake. North side bays, because they'll get more sunlight than the south side ones will. And it's the north side bays that are shallow that have the darkest bottom, because that dark bottom will absorb the heat and retain it better. The phytoplankton will first start being produced there in a larger amount. The zooplankton will move into it, and some fish right after ice out will go to it. The pike are going to go be spawning. Sometimes they'll run out the river systems when there's ice still on the lake. The walleyes are the second ones to go spawn. When it is time for them to reproduce, food doesn't count. If they got to go 2 weeks without it, you know, like we see big bucks sometimes kill one another when they're in the process of rutting. Well, fish sometimes die in the process of doing what they're doing with reproduction as well, and that's just part of the process. But food is secondary then. Now, to other fish, like say the lake has got largemouth in it, smallmouth in it, crappies in it, those fish are going to spawn later on, so they will go seek out those warm water bays first thing. Because the plankton will be there, the minnows come in to eat the zooplankton, the big fish come in to eat the minnows, and it happens. Now maybe this one bay is really good for 4 or 5 days, but you're into a warm spell. Now it starts heating up some of the medium-sized bays, and they start getting more opportunity, and the fish start moving around. More of them will come out of the basin and go up into these kind of bays, and it starts to go as food is produced. All of the other things are secondary sources of food. It starts with phytoplankton and zooplankton, period.